Welcome to the Solar IMG podcast, and today we've got a very special returning guest. Some of you may remember Arnie Gunderson from one of our previous podcasts and from the videos at fairwinds.com. He is the chief engineer at Fairwinds Associates. Thanks for coming on the podcast on such short notice while you're traveling, Arnie.
Hi, thanks for having me. Sorry about the quality because I'm on a cell phone, but looking forward to talking to you.
Now, today it's been getting a little bit of mainstream media attention that there's problems at Reactor 2. They did the endoscopy thing. I'm not too, up on the up and up. I was hoping you could please tell our listeners what's up.
Well, it's about time mainstream media paid a little attention to Reactor 2 and Fukushima in general. What they've been able to do is get into the reactor building at Unit 2. And, of course, Reactor building is that box, and Unit 2 is the only one that still has a box. The others got blown to smithereens. So they got into the reactor building and were able to put an endoscope down into the containment, not into the reactor, but into the containment. So, they've entered the dry well, and then they're heading down the side of the vessel toward the suppression pool. And they had expected to find water at 5 meters and didn't find any, and 4 meters and didn't find any, and 3 and 2 and 1, and they didn't find any water until they got to 60 centimeters. Now that's about 2 feet. So there's only 2 feet of water in the bottom of the containment. So the question becomes, where's it going? Because they're pouring in 5 to 10 tons of water a day, and they had expected that it would be there would be a high water level, and if it's high in the containment, they were hoping that it would run into the nuclear reactor as well, and they could have 5 or 4 meters of water in the nuclear reactor. Well, the problem is, without that amount of water for shielding, it will be very difficult to remove any nuclear fuel. There's 2 pieces. The endoscope determined that there wasn't much water, and 60 centimeters corresponds roughly to the lower lip of the downcomer leg into the suppression pool. So I think it's pretty clear that there's damage in the suppression pool in Unit 2. Now that was postulated. I know I talked about it, but others did too. There was an explosion in Unit 2, and it was likely to be in that leg between the dry well and the suppression pool. And it looks like that's the case. So they're pouring water into the nuclear reactor. It's running out somehow, and is now not in the containment either. So it's leaking out of the containment. Now, the other piece of that was, in addition to the endoscope, they also were able to put in a radiation detector. And they couldn't put them in together, which is too bad. But as the lower they got, the higher the radiation levels got, which clearly indicates that the nuclear core has slumped and is in the bottom of the reactor and also in the bottom of the containment. So it definitely indicates a meltdown. The numbers they got are absolutely astronomical. 70 sieverts an hour, and you got to slap 2 zeros on the end of that to get to REM. So it's 7,000 REM. And 1,000 will cause neurological damage and kill you in about 15, 20 minutes. So we are well over lethal exposures in a very short time. Now, this late, the accident is now almost 13 months old now, and so to see this high a level of radiation that far into the accident means that a lot of the radiation is decayed away. More than half of it disappeared in the first year. But at this point now, it will decay very slowly. The cesiums will decay, half of the cesium, cesium-134, will decay pretty quickly over the next 10 years. Cobalt-60 will decay over the next 50 years. But still, cesium-137, which is a nasty isotope, is going to be hanging around for 300 years. So this radiation that they're detecting is not going to go away. It's higher than in outer space, and of course we all know that space probes are heavily shielded because radiation damages the electronics. So the second concern here is how are we going to remove this even with a robot? Because with these high radiation fields, it'll wreck the integrated the circuits that are inside the robot. So it's really been a severe setback to dismantle the plant. Nobody really knows how to handle these kinds of exposures outside of in a hot cell facility that's designed for it. This was never designed for it. So I guess my takeaway on it is a couple things. One is it just amped up the cost. This is if it was 10 billion, it's probably 15 billion now on just that reactor. Each of these reactors is going to experience the same thing. So the cost is up, and two, the time has grown. Whatever they thought they could do is now going to take longer. But I think the $64,000 question here is, where is the core? How much of it's in the nuclear reactor, and how much of it fell through the nuclear reactor, I believe, through those control rod drive holes in the bottom of the reactor. How much of it's still in the nuclear reactor, and how much of it is in the is on the bottom of the dry well? We know it's low, we know it's slumped, but exactly what part is still in the vessel and how much is on the floor is really unknown. The other piece of this is, where is the water going? It's obviously leaking into other buildings, the turbine hall, and I was able to get a document from a General Electric startup engineer, and it's an old document. It dates to the early 80s. And the document said that the penetrations between the containment and other buildings are likely to fail in the event of an accident in a Mark I containment. Well, what that means is that in the incredible heat and the incredible pressure they had in the containment, not only did the lid of the containment lift, like I talk about on the Fairwinds video, but in addition, probably within 4 or 5, maybe 6 days, the penetrations where the electrical wires come in started to rot out. It's exacerbated because it's salt water. So you've got rubber penetrations going through a concrete containment, and with high heat, high radiation, high humidity, and high pressure. And on top of that, oh, by the way, we're putting salt water on the penetration. So my guess is the penetrations are failing as well, allowing all of that water, 5 tons a day or more, to leak into other buildings.
So I guess, wow, you went over to Japan and you did the samples. That's well covered on Fairwinds in your latest video, so I'm not going to beat a dead horse. But at the beginning, when we realized that this was a real serious situation, we were kind of derided and called paranoid, and, it's not even nearly as bad as Chernobyl, some people said. But now the mainstream media is starting to come out with this. Why now?
Yeah, I was attacked by Rush Limbaugh on radio. After I was on CNN once or twice, he was calling me a fearmonger. And of course, the time has proven that, if anything, I was conservative. Why now is a really good question. I think the mainstream media had in their mind that this is a problem that's going to go away. And it's not going away. It's like one of these horror movies where the creature keeps coming up from the grave. They claim it's in cold shutdown, and all at once we have problems like this. I think TEPCO has actually created this problem by trying to minimize the problem. If if they had said immediately, or even 6 months later, that this is a real bad problem and we're in it for a 50-year slog here, that would have been one thing. But they've always said, well, we're getting close to getting it under control, and we're going to wrestle this bucking bronco to the ground. But it's not happening, and it can't happen. The laws of physics are telling us that this is a 50-year battle, and in the end, they're going to spend a lot of money, and in the end, they're going to dismantle the plant. But between now and year 1 and year 50, it's going to cost a lot of radiation exposure to workers, and it's going to cost a lot of money, and create a lot of technology. There's nothing on the market now that can even begin to handle the problems they're facing. So this is, probably I'm not sure how old you are, but when you have grandkids, they'll still be watching the Fukushima decommissioning.
Wow, that's absolutely incredible. Well, a lot of the monitoring stations have been taken down, and they've stopped doing a lot of the air monitoring and the rain monitoring. Some of the folks who are responsible for this have acknowledged that they've had communications problems. And when I tried, I'm used to, having a wonderful relationship with the powers that be. But when I, tried to get somebody to speak about this, it was a 3-month battle, and it was very heavily managed. And I just wasn't used to that or expecting that. People are really concerned about the water, especially in Hawaii. I know people who love to scuba dive and surf and whatnot. People are actually seriously considering relocating from Hawaii. I think this may be a kind of a rash idea, but how can people minimize their risk in these contaminated areas?
Well, I think the ocean's a big place, and there's an enormous amount of cesium leaking into it at Fukushima, but of course it does get diluted by the time it gets to Hawaii. I guess I'm more worried about the bioaccumulation up the food chain, and seeing top predators like tuna and salmon and barracuda and things like that become contaminated over the next 2, 3, 4 years with increasingly high amounts of cesium. What you said is right on, though. There's no monitoring of this. The last I heard, the U.S. government had monitored about 300 fish in the last year total. So clearly we're importing tens of millions, and we're only looking at 200. So we're not going to. We have a system designed not to find the contamination problem. The other piece of this is the debris field is heading toward Hawaii and the West Coast. Most of that debris came from the tsunami, and the tsunami hit up and down the coast. So it's not all Fukushima debris, but some of it certainly came from within 10 or 20 miles of the reactor, and some of that's likely to be contaminated. Remember, I guess it was the 3rd or 4th day, the Ronald Reagan was 100 miles offshore and was picking up contamination on its deck. So if the Reagan got contaminated 100 miles away, I think it's reasonable to think that the debris field got contaminated as well. Now, it's been out at sea for a year and had waves sloshing over it and stuff like that, but still, I think we will find some of that debris come across the Pacific and wind up contaminated. So I hope that when people pick through that debris, one, there's personal effects in it and that deserve to be honored. So I hope that people honor the personal effects. But separately, though, I hope they have their inspectors out and are checking for radiation as well, because some of that debris has got to be contaminated.
My heart really goes out to the Japanese people. I feel very much for them, and I'm also concerned about the service members of the 7th Fleet. But even the Russians rejected a shipment of auto parts, and when I think about Russia, the first thing that comes to my mind isn't exactly safety standards. So
people have sent us car air filters, and not to us, but to the lab. They sent it directly. But one person did send us a box of air filters, and I have a Geiger counter at home, and I approached the box, and I didn't even have to open it up, and my Geiger counter was going way upscale. So when you sell a car to the Japanese have very high standards for inspection. So a car that the Japanese can't drive anymore gets sold to Australia or gets sold to the Soviet Union. And nobody's changing out the air filters and things like that. So I'm sure that if at the docks people opened up the air filters and checked them out, you would find contaminated air filters. I mean, if somebody sent me a box full of them in Vermont, I'm sure that same problem exists wherever those imported used cars are sent.
Many of us have seen the infamous photo of the site on fire as the tsunami approached, so that would tend to indicate that there was a failure at the plant before the tsunami even hit. And still many people aren't aware of that, which is kind of surprising. And this model is in use all over, but what about other types of reactors, like, for example, the CANDU reactors? Do they have similar issues that may lead them to have problems during an earthquake?
Yeah, let me get back to your preamble there. I have not seen a picture of the site on fire before the tsunami hit. There was a fire, but I believe it's at an oil refinery that's several miles away. And while the way the picture is taken, it's hard to differentiate. But I think the fire that occurred before the tsunami was not on site. Now, I don't mean to minimize, though. It's pretty clear that Unit 1 at Fukushima Daiichi was in trouble before the tsunami hit. You know, there was high radiation in the reactor building. There was high radiation at the fence post in the first hour. And, of course, they had the trouble with the isolation condenser and things like that. So, then, of course, it was the first one to melt down, the first one to explode, first one to run out of water. So something happened in Unit 1 before the tsunami hit. I don't know what it is, but obviously it's seismically induced. So that throws a monkey wrench into the nuclear industry's seismic analysis. I mean, these plants were designed to withstand the earthquake that hit that site. It was a 9 out in the ocean, but on land it was a 7.9. And the plant was close, but designed to withstand something that severe. And yet, Unit 1 failed, and that should be a major concern for the industry, because the codes that they used and the snubbers and the pipes that were in that plant should not have broken, but it appears that one did. Now, the other part of your question is, what about other reactors around the world? You know, I'm on record, and it's on the site, on the Fairwind site, but I'm on record saying that the Mark I should be shut down anywhere in the U.S. or there's a few in other countries as well. But the CANDU reactors are entirely different, and like all these, they have their advantages and they have their disadvantages. One of the disadvantages of the CANDU reactors is that they have a positive reactivity coefficient, and what that means is that as they enter an accident, as temperature goes up, power in an American reactor goes down. That's a negative reactivity coefficient, but in the CANDU reactors, it goes up, and in a way, they're similar to Chernobyl, although there's certainly differences as well. The CANDU reactors, one of my concerns is that the Canadian government spun off the CANDU reactors, and one of their owners now is their employees through pension funds. And if you're an employee worried about getting your pension, the last thing you want to do is shut the nuke down that's providing, 1, your income, and 2, your chance at a pension. So I think there's an opportunity in the system for people to knowingly minimize safety concerns because their owners in the pension fund that's driven by, of course, keeping that reactor running for a long time. So, it's not just hardware problems, but institutional problems that concern me a lot.
Wow. Well, what do you think is on tap for the rest of this year? Are we going to continue to see more emissions? Are we going to continue to see more bioaccumulation? I know you've mentioned the rice, you've mentioned the tuna. What do you think's in store?
Well, we're just getting to the point where the cedar is pollinating in Japan right around now, and it'll be interesting to see what the exposures are from that. This year's going to be better than last year because a lot of that material has been washed off and has gone into lakes, rivers, and ultimately into the ocean. So a lot of the land crops over time will gradually decrease in concentration. But every time a farmer takes a blade to that, he turns over that soil and brings up the cesium that has gradually worked down. Now, the cesium, of course, is it's a muscle seeker and creates a phenomenon called Chernobyl heart. In developing kids, the cesium hits the heart muscle and causes heart defects. So it's the one we track, one, because it's easiest to see in most common instruments, pick it up pretty easily. But the other part of it is that it's nasty. It and strontium are two of the worst isotopes. The strontium, on the other hand, I know it's out there, and that will bioaccumulate, but that causes leukemias that manifest in 20 or 30 years. We're just now, there was a study out of the University of Pittsburgh that saw a statistically meaningful increase in leukemias from people near 3 Mile Island. So here's 30 years out, and we're just now getting the studies that show statistically meaningful increases in leukemias. And 3 Mile Island was 1,000th of what Fukushima was. Sorry about that.
Meanwhile, if I light up a smoke while I'm having a beer at a bar, I'm going to get a ticket and kicked out.
No comment.
Well, thank you very much, Arnie, for taking the time to speak with us. I really appreciate your work, and I know that a lot of our listeners are big fans. I'd encourage everyone to stay tuned to fairwinds.com to keep posted, and thank you very much for your tireless and intrepid work to keep all of us informed.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And in parting, I think, again, I've said it before, we all owe a debt of gratitude to about 1,000 or 2,000 men and women, mainly men, in Japan who risked their lives in those first 3 weeks. Without those guys, Japan would have been cut in half. I'm speaking to you on March 28th, and of course, TMI began the 28th, and it was probably at its worst on the 29th and 30th. So, we've had our accident, the Russians had theirs, and now the Japanese are experiencing it as well. Hopefully, we'll learn from these lessons. Thanks again.
Thanks, yeah. And just on the record, you're not an opponent of nuclear power. You're just a proponent of safe nuclear power.
You got it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Arnie, and we'll say a prayer for the Fukushima 1000.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.